In 2011, thousands of secret files held by the Foreign and Commonwealth Office were released by the British High Court in a legal case against Britain by Kenyans for abuse and torture more than 50 years ago. The files revealed to all the details of what ministers in London already knew: the brutal attempt by Britain to crush the rebellion of the Mau Mau people. Although the rebellion eventually led to the independence of Kenya, the atrocities suffered by the Mau Mau rebels are enough to make one wonder if it was worth it. From murders to torture and sexual assaults, here are the acts of brutality endured by the Mau Mau people. Welcome to Unveiled History. On July 1st, 1895, Kenya was claimed as a British protectorate, and from the beginning it was obvious that the land, which is some of the richest soils in the world, was the primary interest of the British. As a result, the indigenous people of Kenya were driven from their homes and lands to pave the way for the British settlers. From 1902, when the first settlers arrived, to the next 3 decades, the colonial government and the British settlers consolidated their control over Kenya's land. By the 1930s, the government had seized over 7 million acres of land, most of which were in the fertile regions of Central and Rift provinces. These areas would later be known as the White Highlands due to the fact that only the British settlers lived there. With no access to their land, most of the locals were forced to become wage labourers to earn a living. But even that was a problem, because the locals were paid poorly and worked under strict conditions. While all the local tribes in Kenya were affected by the land-grabbing policies of the British, people who suffered the most were the Kikuyu. By 1933, Kikuyu had over 109.5 miles of their land taken from them. It's no wonder then that they formed the majority of the Mau Mau fighters. By 1944, demands of political parties and land reforms began to rise. Specifically, Kenyan nationalists like Jomo Kenyatta of the Kenya-Africa Union began to press the British government for political rights and land reforms, although it yielded nothing. The failure of the KAU to address the grievances of the people, particularly those related to land, led to the creation of a group that was more militant in nature. By 1952, the Mau Mau fighters had begun to attack political settlements and even organised raids on British settlers' farms. To prove their commitment to their cause, the Mau Mau fighters took oaths, binding them to their cause. But then the death of the senior chief Ruhi at the hand of the Mau Mau fighters led the British officials to declare a state of emergency. The Kenya Emergency, which lasted from 1952 to 1960, was the beginning of an aggressively fought counter-insurgency. What started as an attempt to restore law and order turned into a full-blown brutality and torture of the Mau Mau people. Following the declaration of a state of emergency by the governor of Kenya, British Army General Sir George Erskine arrived in Kenya to launch a security operation against the Mau Mau. His mission was to restore law and order to the colony. On April 24, 1954, the colonial administration launched an assault known as Operation Anvil on the Mau Mau rebels. The operation involved rounding up 17,000 Mau Mau suspects and confining them in detention camps without trials. Detainees were moved from one camp to another depending on their willingness to cooperate with the government and denounce the Mau Mau. Specifically, the detainees were expected to confess that they had taken the Mau Mau oath and to repent of doing so. The detention camps were overcrowded and lacked decent sanitation, which led to different epidemics of diseases, including typhoid, dysentery and tuberculosis. Still, in 1954, the colonial administration initiated a process known as villagization, where 1 million Kenyans were forced to burn their homes and were rounded up and placed in detention camps fenced with barbed wires. According to estimates made by historians, more than 150,000 of these were only suspected to be Mau Mau rebels. These people spent the next 6 years of their lives living in these camps, where acts of brutality by the colonial guards were widespread. The Mau Mau rebels were subjected to arbitrary killings, severe physical assaults, and extreme acts of inhuman and degrading treatment. Acts of torture include castration and sexual assaults, which usually involved the insertion of broken bottles into the vaginas of female detainees. Camp guards also engaged in regular beatings and assaults, which often resulted in death. In some cases, during the course of interrogation, the guards would hang detainees upside down and insert sand and water into their anuses. In 1957, the colonial administration decided to upgrade the level of torture, especially for those who still refused to cooperate and comply with orders. The detainees were subjected to a torture technique known as the dilution technique. The technique involved the systematic use of brute force to overpower the Mau Mau rebels with the help of fists, clubs, whips and truncheons. The guards would assault the detainees repeatedly using fists, clubs and whips until they confessed and repented of their alleged allegiance to the Mau Mau. The violence and brutality continued in these detention camps until March 1959, when 11 detainees were killed by camp guards in a single incident at the Holler camp. Following the incident, the inquest revealed that each death was caused by shock and hemorrhage due to multiple bruising. The public outcry from the Holler killings led to the Fairn Report, which was published on the 1st of September 1959. The Fairn Report revealed the use of excessive force in the emergency detention camps, and on January 13th, 1960, the Kenyan emergency officially ended and the camps were subsequently shut down. 3 years later, Kenya got its independence. However, hundreds of thousands of men and women have quietly lived with the damage, both physical and psychological, that was inflicted on them during the Mau Mau War. Officially, the number of Mau Mau rebels killed was about 11,000, including 1,090 convicts hanged by the British administration. However, according to historians, the death toll could be as high as 25,000. The Kenya Human Rights Commission has even said that about 90,000 Kenyans were executed, tortured and maimed during the crackdown. In mid-2009, a London firm, Laird & Co, lodged a claim on behalf of 5 elderly Kenyans who had been victims of the Mau Mau War against the British government. 2 of the male victims had been castrated, while another survived the Hollow massacre. One of the females had been subjugated to sexual assault, which involved having bottles filled with boiling water pushed up her vagina. It was during the Mau Mau case that Professor David Anderson discovered papers in the archives which eventually led to the discovery of secret files held by the Foreign and Commonwealth Office. According to the reports, the files had been evacuated from Kenya before independence, as they were deemed too sensitive to be allowed to fall into the hands of an independent Kenyan government. The files, known as Migrated Archives, provided details of British human rights abuses including torture, rape and execution in its former colonies. It included confirmation and chilling details of the violence and brutality inflicted on suspected Mau Mau rebels in the detention camps. Several allegations of murder and rape by British military officials were recorded in the files. This includes how a Kenya baby was burnt to death, the rape of a young girl, and how a soldier in the Royal Irish Fusiliers killed 2 rebels in cold blood. The files further revealed that the governor of Kenya at the time, Evelyn Baring, was very much aware of the extreme brutality which included drastic beatings, solitary confinements, castrations, sodomy, rape, and burning. But he did absolutely nothing. The secret files also detailed accounts of the policy of seizing the livestock of Kenyans suspected to be supporting the Mau Mau rebels. According to Professor David, the files had been hidden to protect the guilty. However, despite the evidence against the British government, the British Foreign Office maintained that it was not liable for colonial atrocities. But on the 6th of June 2013, the UK government decided to settle the claimants of the legal case. According to the British Foreign Secretary, the settlement included payment of a settlement sum in respect of 5,228 claimants, as well as the gross cost sum to the total value of £19.9 million. However, the documents revealed that it was actually the policy of the British colonial government, and hiding the files was an attempt to erase history.